Good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Dawn Campbell. I'm your host as usual at the IAPC&M CPD and Business Building webinar. Today we have a very different type of webinar for you and I'm joined by Sean McCallum. Hello Sean.
Hello.
Sean is a veteran of the Iraq War in 2003 and currently serving as a fire and rescue service watch manager and incident commander. He's also supported officers to recover from PTSD and is a decorated officer following the London terror attacks in 2017, to name but a few of his accolades. I'd like to add that more recently, he's freely supported our Lebanese coaching community with crisis training so that they could not only help themselves and their nearest and dearest, but helped their community to rebuild a better future. So, I don't want to take up too much time because we've only got about 90 minutes with Sean, who's very, very busy. But with what everybody's going through in terms of COVID and experiencing all sorts of different types of trauma, I'm very pleased to welcome Sean, and I hope we're going to learn a lot in this 90 minutes, usually condensed from a 2, 3 or 4 day course that he delivers. So this is just a little taster and to give you something to help you deal with your clients. And then you'll be able to deal with Sean directly afterwards. We're going to take questions as they come, just post them in the chat box. So sit back and get your pad and pen out and start scribbling away. So over to you, Sean, please.
Thank you, Dawn. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to be here, and I hope that you'll get some benefit from the 90 minutes or so that we're going to share together. Just before I start, Dawn, I can't see the chat box, so would it be okay if you relay questions?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so trauma, coaching trauma, coaching, psychology, mental health, therapy, etc. Bit of a warm potato in some respects with regard to where we draw the line between coaching and therapy, and it's an ongoing process of development, I think, with lots of different schools of thought. However, I am of the school of thought where I believe that as coaches we can certainly have a positive impact with clients, coachees, if we take a perspective on trauma or PTSD rather than from a clinical perspective, and look at trauma from a philosophical and a social or psychosocial point of view. So some of the stuff that I'm going to be presenting today is going to refer to some philosophical background, mostly from Aristotle, some of it from David Hume with regard to causality. But it's not too heady, I don't think, and you'll always have the video to refer back to if you miss anything. Please do stop me and ask questions. Start my time. Just ask questions as we go, if you wish. I'll try to do my best to answer queries, bearing in mind the need to press on through the 90 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to basically look at what trauma is from a clinical perspective initially, and also we're going to look at some indicators and some of the effects that trauma, PTSD or critical incident stress, however you care to term it, can have on us as humans, and how you may be able to spot some of those little telltale indicators in coachees. And sometimes that'll be really obvious, because you may come across a coachee who presents, with, the whole world has just fallen in. And then you may find that you have a coachee who for some reason just cannot get past a little point that seems stuck. And I hope by the end of today, or the end of this session, you may have an idea with regard to why some people do get stuck in the process of coaching, and why they find it difficult sometimes to go from potential to actuality, despite all your best efforts as brilliant and wonderful, caring professional coaches. Because there are some things where, you know, we just can't help. And there are reasons behind that. And trauma is one of those reasons, I believe. So with that, I'll press on. And once I've got this to work, terrible. Oh, no, there we go. Right. Okay. So this is just an opening gambit that I'd like to remember, and it's from Aristotle, particularly from Aristotle's Metaphysics, and it was written about 2,000 or so years ago. And he was a very perceptive individual, and luckily we have not anywhere near as many texts as we should have or could have, but we have plenty of texts by which to refer to look at in trying to understand human behaviour. And one of Aristotle's tenets was this, and you'll have to forgive me, ladies, because Aristotle was a man of his time, but he said that all men by their nature desire to know. And what Aristotle was telling us in that is that all men by their nature, all people by their nature, desire to understand. We desire to understand our world, you know, we desire to understand ourselves, just everything in the physical and mental reality that we all live in, we desire to understand. Okay, so it's just something to bear in mind as we press forward. Just to let you know a little bit about me and where I come from. So, as Dawn's already explained, I'm a firefighter and a former combat infantryman. And I specialise within the UK Fire and Rescue Service in providing peer support for other officers following critical incidents. And I was lucky enough to be part of the coordination team for the site recovery that took place following the Westminster attack, the Borough Market attack, and latterly the Grenfell Tower disaster. And that gave me an awful lot of learning in terms of experience and just being able to observe what happened during those incidents and following. And out of that, I developed this system, critical incident stress intervention and support, otherwise known as crisis. Okay, and it's based in philosophy, as you'll see today, and that's what we do. So we do the counter-terror stuff as and when we're called upon. We provide corporate support, and also we do stuff with charities, which I absolutely love. And so we look at a trauma-informed approach to helping people such as substance addicts, etc. Okay. Now, I mentioned psychosocial. So there's just a brief, I'm just moving all you guys across there so I can see. There we go. That's not working. Let's tell you what there. Sorry. There we go. So psychosocial is a word that you may see bandied about from here to there now and again on social media, but not an awful lot of people actually really understand what it means and how a psychosocial approach can be used with regard to supporting people through trauma. Okay. But jargon aside, the most important thing is this at the bottom. It's about humans helping other humans to progress through traumatic experiences and times of difficulty and stress. It doesn't always have to be trauma, it can be stress too. But we're talking about lay people, non-clinicians, helping lay people to get through something, you know, and that's about love, and that's about care, and that's about kindness, and it's also about having a non-judgmental approach to people that we're supporting, and being, as Alice Miller described, the attentive witness to somebody's distress. Okay, so we're talking about a little space between incident and the clinical world as we know it within the National Health Service, and if you're not from the UK, forgive me, whatever your clinical services happen to be. Okay. Now this is the United Kingdom's definition of post-traumatic stress as a disorder, and it is as it is. It is as simple as a soundbite, as an anxiety disorder caused by very stressful, frightening, or distressing events. And I don't think that that's a particularly good definition of what trauma is, but it does work well as a go-to grab for most people and for the media and for general lay people who are trying to understand what is this thing that we call trauma or post-traumatic stress as a disorder. Now, when somebody presents at the GPs believing that they may be suffering from post-traumatic stress, they're generally diagnosed along these four domains. So intrusion is about intrusive thoughts, intrusion in social experience, nightmares, etc., etc. Avoidance is about simply trying to avoid anything to do with anything that's a potential threat, you know. And so, for example, if you fell off a bike, generally speaking, most people would, after the initial pain, get back on the bike in a few days or so and try to ride it again. Avoidance is where we try to just avoid anything to do with something that may be painful. Arousal is something, it's essentially it's hyper arousal. It's the constant feeling of on edge. It's the constant watching for danger or threat. And that can interfere in all sorts of ways in a social environment, such as, you know, the veteran who is unable to go into a marketplace, for example, and so on and so forth. And they all sort of culminate in the last one, which is social, domestic and work disruption. So it's measured on just how well you're doing as a functioning or not functioning member of society across the domains that you have in terms of your family, colleagues, work, etc., so on and so forth. Okay. And these are the domains in which we can be affected by post-traumatic stress. That's across the emotional level, which is, you know, the way that we feel, cognitive, the way that we think, behavioural is fairly self-explanatory, but most of that tends to be maladaptive. So by maladaptive, I mean it's the sudden interest in something that we've never been interested in before, and then we go absolutely crazy doing it. You know, like the guy that's never done any running whatsoever suddenly decides that they're going to be a marathon runner and tries to run, you know, 26 miles a day for a week, etc. And vice versa, the runner who is a marathon runner and suddenly decides, I'm just not interested anymore. You know, these are all sort of maladaptive behavioural coping mechanisms, I think is probably the best way to put it. And of course the physical, which is affected by all three of the above. So poor eating, lack of exercise, putting on weight, other psychosomatic disturbances such as pains, stomach aches, dizziness, etc., and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's what you'll get measured against if you do present to a clinical world. Now, I'm not going to read through these verbatim because they're fairly self-explanatory, and you can go through these at your will on the video which Dawn's recording for us. However, the one thing that I do like to highlight with this is the word apathy. So if, as a coach, you feel that this is where your coachee may be, then this is alarm bell time. Because if we're at that stage, then none of this matters. Okay? So from a safeguarding perspective, if you feel that you've got a client, I want to say client if that's okay, because I don't particularly like the word coachee, but client seems to fit. If you've got a client who is in that state, that's alarm bell time. And from a safeguarding point of view, this is when you definitely need to be referring to clinical services, crisis teams, GPs, etc., and so on and so forth. And it does happen. I've had a client this week actually that I've had to refer, which surprised me, but you've got to be there, you've got to be prepared for it. So there we are. So I'll move on from there. So again, cognitive difficulties that people experience while they're enduring trauma.
Sean, just
Again,
before you move on, can you just give us a definition of apathy? Because for some people, apathy is, oh, I can't be bothered. But obviously, it's a much deeper meaning in the sense that you're talking about, isn't it?
yes, thank you, Dawn. Yes. So when I refer to apathy, I mean the total loss of interest in anything or anyone. So when perhaps we used to get sad when we thought about the thing that happened, or angry, or all of the below, it can get to a point on the emotional scale where somebody becomes so distressed that none of it actually really matters too much, including life. Okay, is that an adequate definition, Dawn? Okay?
Yes, thank you. Essentially, it's not that they can't be bothered to do something; it's that they've actually given up.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Dawn. Okay, now I'll just highlight this suicidal ideation. People do think about suicide a lot, you know. It does happen. We all do it at some point. So it's not necessarily always a straight run for the door if somebody expresses that they have in the past, you know, considered suicide, because people do it. You have to make a judgment call with regard to whether, you know, you're going to be safe as a practitioner in terms of your legal and moral responsibilities, and also, of course, whether this individual in front of you is going to be safe too. You know, personally, if it's a passing comment or a whim, yes, I felt like suicide. I felt suicidal in the past, however, but I've got over that now. Whatever, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But when somebody's telling you, for example, that you know, they've got plans, they've made plans, they've started taking action towards the end goal, you know, that's a real indicator that you need to get your safeguarding hat on and deal with that appropriately. Okay. Okay. There's nothing there that's too revolutionary. You know, it's all there when you think about it. However, again, the high risk behaviours, you know, that may present a safeguarding issue for you, but probably not. But just be aware of it. You know, if suddenly your client decides that they're going to go base jumping and they've never done it before, you know, that's an indicator that something's definitely amiss. Okay. And the physical side of things, which is really interesting, this psychosomatic way of being that we seem to have as humans, you know, so something terrible that happens in the physical world outside of your body can have a fairly succinct physical outcome too, or outcomes. So just for background, for information, so if somebody is suffering from illness or whatever, or suddenly, I don't know, decides that, or starts cancelling appointments for no apparent reason, it may well not be this, but if it's blamed on illness, it may be worth exploring. Something for you to think about. Okay. Right. Okay. So what's a critical incident then? That's basically what trauma is in terms of the clinical side of stuff. And it's a glib, I suppose, coverage, but you can look back and look at that, and you can read further on the internet. But I want to try now to give you guys a better understanding of how we come to be traumatized. Okay. And it starts with this. It starts with a critical incident. Now, there's a reason for using the term critical incident. And that's our definition of it. Any event, incident, situation, or occurrence that has the potential to overwhelm a person's natural coping abilities. Okay, so that we can define as a critical incident. And we use that terminology, I use that terminology because the go-to media thing that you'll see is that, oh, it was traumatic. It was a traumatic event. And the logic that lies behind that claim is substantially flawed. And the other reason we use this is because it helps us to consider other things that we would not necessarily be associated with the development and later onset of post-traumatic stress as a disorder. Okay, so there is no such thing as a traumatic event. Okay, there are, however, unique and subjective reactions. Okay, so what we're talking about there is experience one incident. Let's take for a road traffic collision, but it doesn't happen. So using the term traumatic event is a bit of a misnomer. It's a bit of a myth, and I think it's got some. I think it's responsible for some of the stigma that we see as well. You know, but that's another story for another day. So, and here's why: because David Hume. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Hume. He was a Scots philosopher, and he did a lot of work on causality, and a lot of his work's still highly thought of today. And he noticed two things. One was subsequence, or what he called conjunction, and that was that a phenomenon was associated with the presence of other factors. So the RTC being the factor, the traumatized firefighter or traumatized police officer, implying correlation between the two. So A plus A and B together sometimes make C. Okay, and this is what I think we see with the myth of the traumatic event. We're implying that because this incident type or this event is unpleasant, we label it as traumatic, and therefore, if how on earth, it must have been so traumatic, you know. And I know as a first responder that, to be perfectly honest, most of them really aren't, you know. Some of them are really quite good jobs, and we go there and we do the best that we can, and we win far more than we lose. But sometimes we lose some. But you know what? We still did a good job. Okay, so we take something positive from it, and it's not traumatic for most of us. Sometimes it is. Okay. Now this is causation according to Hume. So if the traumatic event actually existed, that concept, then it would imply causation, and therefore everybody would be traumatized. Do you see the difference there? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. All right then. So examples of critical incidents: combat, road traffic collision, terror attacks, disaster, sudden bereavement, violence and sex crimes. It's just a small list, but these are the things that we tend to go to when we think of PTSD, okay, or trauma, or however the media tend to report it on that day. But what about this? Oops, there we go. Okay. Sorry, Catherine, I'm a firefighter. I'm not that bright. So, these are day-to-day life experiences that, you know, most of us will experience at some point. And people always get surprised. And I love to tell people this, but there are more women in the UK suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder through that one than there are combat veterans suffering PTSD in the United Kingdom. You know, so it just goes to show, and generally I always get an eyebrow lift with that, at least. Like, oh, what? Okay. But yeah, so again, another example that it's not necessarily the incident type that is always framed as causal, is it? You know, because childbirth is supposed to be a wonderful thing, apparently. But there we are. Okay. Now, the reason I'm putting that there as well is because, you know, you will get clients that experience these things, you know, or will have experienced some of these things in their past. All right, and it's day-to-day stuff, apparently. Okay. Most people following something that's really bad will tend to recover. You know, it's a propensity, which we'll come to later, for growth and development that enables most people following a subjective period of time after the incident they'll generally start to feel better and come to terms with it and understand it, and it will fall into the past, you know. And a good example I like to use is a relationship breakup. I can remember having my heart broken by a lady from New Zealand, and I was absolutely distraught. Oh, it was awful. My whole world fell in, you know. And it took a while to get over that. But you know what? I can't actually look back and put my finger on the exact point in time when suddenly Tracy didn't matter anymore. It just didn't. And it was really difficult to understand at the time, but it just didn't, you know. And we find this with grief as well, with losing someone, you know. And don't get me wrong, some people will never recover from losing a significant loved one, but it will always be unpleasant. But there's a difference between something being unpleasant in the past and something that's traumatic and on your face in the here and now. Okay, there's a such difference in that. But most people do tend to recover when bad things happen. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick check for time. Oh, loads of time. Okay, so reactions. So when things happen, when bad things happen, we get reactions, don't we? Well, not most of them, they're all unconscious. We don't actually think about anything, but suddenly we'll start crying, we'll feel upset, angry, whatever, you know. But what reactions do, and it's really important, is that they give us an opportunity to observe injury. And when I say injury, I mean psychological injury. A bit like a poker player's tell, you know. If we're skilled enough, we can use observation to understand the presenting issues and then make some sort of evaluative decision. Well, is there something else going on for this client that lies behind the eyes rather than something that's been immediately presented? Okay. There was a research paper by Oza al. I think it's 2007. My memory escapes me. But these are 5 key indicators for the later onset of post-traumatic stress as a disorder. Okay, so the first one's dead obvious. So if somebody's experienced a trauma before, then there's a potential, or the greater the potential, for a further traumatic reaction in the future. Okay, the level of perceived threat is important, and it's not just the level of threat to physicality. It can be the threat to mental integrity. It can be the threat to social movement or social adeptness. It can be threat to a relationship. It can be threat to finance. It can be threat to my cardinal points, the things that I believe and hold most true, like faith, etc., so on and so forth. Okay. Emotional responses, that's a really simple one. You know, if somebody is majorly upset, or interestingly, or trying really, really hard not to be upset, then that's an indicator. Dissociation is something that's we're going to touch on later, so I'm not going to touch too much on that now. But key for us is this one: social support. So Ozanil found that the more social resources, or the more valuable social resources an individual had, then the smaller the potential for a later onset of a decline into poor mental health. So the more valuable social resources you have, the better off you'll be, essentially. And of course, as coaches, you are a form of social resource. You are interacting, you're providing that psychosocial support. Okay, so again, another reason for coaches to have some assuredness that the relationship with the client can be really positive with regard to etc. Okay, there you go, different threats. I've touched on that, so I'll zip through there. Okay, and this is not rocket surgery either, is it? These are just typical emotional responses that you may see with a client who's distraught. Okay, I'll move on from there. Now then, dissociation is a really interesting thing. And it's something that seems to be observed every time we see trauma. And there are two main types, derealization and depersonalization. So the first one here, look, the sense that it's not real, that's derealization. That's where the detached feeling of you can see it, and you can hear it, you can smell it, you can sense it, but it's not actually happening. It's just not real for the individual. Okay, and depersonalization is the sense that you're not actually there. You're just slightly out of sync with everything. So it's happening, you know it's happening, but you're not involved. Okay, and this is something that clients report a lot, and it's the subject of an awful lot of study, and particularly again referring back to childbirth. So yeah, so dissociation is interesting. So if a client can't tell you significant pieces of the story of what happened, then that may be an indicator that there's been a dissociation taken place, and something to watch for. Okay. Oops. There we go. Computers. Right. If anybody's seen this before, please. Well, you're all on mute anyway, aren't you? There you go. But if anybody's seen it before, please wait till the end. I'm going to ask you to unmute afterwards. Okay. Now, the point of this is for you guys to count how many times the players in white t-shirts pass the ball to each other. Okay. And here we go.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many?
Okay. Ginny, how many times did you count?
I didn't actually, because I was looking for the guy in the bear suit thing walking through. I have seen it before, so.
Ah, right. Okay. So, did anybody not see the gorilla?
I didn't.
You're too kind.
Yeah, so I was counting and got up to 13. Anybody want to unmute themselves and say? Ian?
I got up to 15 and I saw the gorilla.
15 and you saw the gorilla?
Absolutely.
Well done, Ian. Did anybody not see the gorilla?
I've seen it before, so I knew it was there. But the first time I saw it, I didn't see the gorilla at all, and I found it amazing that I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
Same with me. I mean, this time was my second time, and I could easily have missed it for the second time because I was busy counting, but it seemed so obvious, really.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, you're all switched on cookies, aren't you? Which is great. Generally, what you tend to see is what we tend to see is that some will go, oh, there was 13 passes, there were 16 passes, or whatever, and there'll be a group within the group who never actually saw the gorilla until you point it out to them, and they go, what? I can't believe that. I was actually looking at it, and we were all looking at the same data. But the point of showing you that is that if you are focused enough with your attention, you can easily miss other data that's occurring at the same time, even though we all would believe that we're perceiving the same thing. Okay. There we go. I won't do it if you've already seen it anyway.
This is
right, and this can be explained with just a little simple illustration. Is that when we're secure and we're not under threat, we can put our attention anywhere we choose to do, and we can do that by just choosing to put our attention on, I don't know, a keyboard or my mum, or the dog, or the glass on the, on the shelf, or whatever. We can do that. We choose where to put our attention, and then that just plops straight back into memory. And if it's important, it will get saved, and if it's not, it will probably just disappear off into the ether, never to be seen ever again. Okay. But when we're under threat, we don't really have too much choice in where we put our attention, because we have the fight, flight, freeze response. And generally what happens is we tend to put our attention squarely, straight away, in a split second, squarely on the thing that's going to kill us, or the thing that's threatening us. Okay. The key thing with this is that while our attention may be fixed on this data, our senses are still collecting other data. Okay, so we are still receiving other data, but our attention is not on it. A bit like driving the car down a road with the trees, and you're focused on the car in front of you, if you've got any sense, okay, and the trees are whizzing past. You know they're there, but you don't perceive it and actualize it. Do you get what I mean with that? Yeah, okay. So if you have got a client who just presents a little bit out of shape, consider these things. It's not an exact science, by the way. However, it may give you some indication as to what is going on for this client while you're, speaking with them or interacting, engaging, or whatever. So just have that in your back pocket. The one thing I've not really touched on here is spiritual indicators at the bottom. That's important because faith in God or faith in a belief system or what have you can be severely shaken by an incident or event that naturally leads someone to question their faith in whatever it is, So faith in an all-powerful, kind and loving God can be severely questioned when you see, a child run over in the street who's innocent, etc., so on and so forth. Okay, so keep an eye on spiritual indicators as well. So that's just for you, just to have in your back pocket, okay, and to be aware of. And you can do more study with regard to this. Please go out and read more because it's interesting stuff. Okay, so now we're going to get to I'm just going to quick time check. Cool. Now we're going to get to the causality with regard to trauma and what seems to happen in that split-second moment when the whole world's about to fall in. Okay, and I've tried to gear this towards a more coaching relevant presentation, because I think it's got some. I think the theory that I'm going to show you has got some ramifications for the way that we coach and the way that we may expect clients to respond. But I mean, you can make your own mind up about that. Have a think about it later. Okay, so we're going to start off with intentions. Now, intentions are really important because they're the things that keep the world moving. They're the things that keep humans being human. They're the things that get things done, because without intention, nothing would ever happen. We'd probably just be like a gelatinous blob of primordial soup still if it was not for intention, because we can't do anything without it. Okay, so an intention is a causal impulse that leads us to do something, and that can be something as simple as having a drink of my coffee, which is now cold, or picking a pen up, or thinking about my 2 girls. So intentions can have an effect not only on the physical world that we all share and agree is reality in that sense, but also we can formulate intentions to carry out activities in our mental world as well, in this world behind our eyes where only we live. Okay, And interestingly, you can't intend to do something that you cannot achieve, which I'll leave you to think about, but it's interesting. And you can't intend to do something that you don't want. If you do something you don't want to do, you can be coerced into making a choice to do something, but if you don't want to do it, you won't do it. That's the nature of intention. So I think that's interesting with regard to coaching and a person-centered approach, and why a person-centered approach is always the best approach, because you can never get any results with anybody whose intentions are contrary to what they're telling you, or in some cases contrary to what the coach expects, if that's the case. But I know you're all switched on cookies and so I'll move on from there. Okay, so this is just a little bit of theory, don't get too hung up on it, but this is with regard to intentions and the activities that we do, and I've just got to set the scene for why we become traumatized. Okay, so we can use the concept of an activity cycle to explain how we do things. Okay, and they all begin with an intention to do something. So they can be creative in terms of affecting something in our physical realm, like picking up my cup of coffee, or they can be receptive in terms of I need to understand, so I want to understand something. Okay, so I can intend to understand something, I can intend to learn something. Okay, but we can also we can form an activity cycle, but we can also choose to give it, just to not fulfill it, to not bother doing it, and we'll come to that shortly. And your whole life, after this presentation, I hope you start looking at your whole life and you start thinking, oh God, I'm doing an activity cycle now, oh, I've got that activity cycle running. And too many activity cycles equals stress, particularly if they're coercive. That's for another day. Okay, so an activity cycle, just a basic illustration. Okay, there's a point in time when it starts, and there's an ending, a point in time when it finishes. Okay, so you start to do something, like I start to pick up my coffee cup, and that activity is now over for me because I have now picked up my coffee cup. Yeah? Okay. But we can look at it this way in terms of intention. So I intended to pick up my coffee cup, and I have now fulfilled that intention because I've picked my coffee cup up. All right? So, how about this one, making a cup of tea? You intend to make a cup of tea, and over the course of 5 minutes, you go to the kitchen, you put the kettle on, you get the tea bag out of the cupboard, out of the tea caddy, put it in the mug, if you're a peasant like me, instead of making a proper brew. Okay, and oh, there we are. And you know, you stand there waiting for the kettle to boil. Kettle boils, click. You lift the kettle up. You pour the hot water into the cup. You mix it about a bit, throw a bit of milk in, and you go, I've made a cup of tea. Yeah, brilliant. And it's fulfilling, isn't it? It's really fulfilling when we do something that we want to do and we complete it. Okay. Or, sorry, I can't even see that. There we go. Promotion. This is an interesting one that I slipped in here for a coaching perspective. So if, say, for example, somebody intends to get promoted at work, it may take them, if that intention is strong enough and the desire is there and the ability to do so, it may take them 5 years to achieve that promotion. But at the point that they're given the tape up, or, you know, here are the keys to the office, etc., that intention has been fulfilled. Okay. But notice the time difference. From 5 minutes to make a cup of tea to 5 years to achieve a promotion. Okay, so different activities may take longer than others. In fact, they do. And that period of time is entirely subjective for that individual. Okay, with regard to what it is that they want to achieve when they formulate the intention. And of course, there are all sorts of different barriers. And, you know, there's the training course, and there's the temporary promotion that I achieved, and there's the, you know, the interview, and etc., so on and so forth, to achieve what it is that you wanted to do. Okay, Writing a book. Put your hand up if you've ever thought about writing a book. Yeah, yeah. I thought about it, and then I thought, you know what? No, I can't be bothered. You know, but some people do write books, don't they? But I started writing something, and it didn't take 8 years. But eventually, I just thought, you know what? I can't be bothered, and I unintended it. I abandoned that intention. Whether I intend to write another book in the future, I don't know. I may do, but there we go. Or what about reading a book? Yeah. So you intend to read a book, and if it's like, you know, a really good Mills and Boon or something like that, it might only take you 9 days to read. My mum used to go through them like cream crackers, you know. But once you've read the book, you've fulfilled your intention. And I know I'm labouring the point, but there's a reason. Okay. So we have 2 different types of activity cycle that are important for us. Action cycles, affecting things, creating things, and learning cycles, which are receptive, and that's about understanding. Okay? So a learning cycle has a receptive phase and an integrative phase. And what I mean by that is we have to perceive the data that we need in order to understand something. Okay? And then once we've got that data, we also have to validate it and accept it and integrate it into our new reality that exists because we understand that data. Okay. So, for example, I understand, this is a bit of a sad one, but I'm going to use it anyway. So, I understand, to understand that my dog has died, okay, firstly, I need to perceive it. I've got to receive that information, the dog's dead. Then I've got to accept it, and then I've got to integrate it into my new reality, because from that point on, the dog is dead, and the dog's not there, and my life now looks different because I won't be taking him for a walk, etc., so on and so forth. Okay, so we have to receive the information before we can integrate it into our new reality, and that's a really important thing when it comes to understanding. Okay. Oops, there we go, traumatic reactions. So this is the cusp of where I've just been leading you. And this is why we see so many people suffering from, you know, the awfulness that is trauma. And it's a really simple concept, okay? And it's that. It is simply that. A repressed, unfilled intention to understand something, okay? It's an unresolved learning activity. Okay, and that model was created by a lovely friend of mine and a wonderful mentor by the name of Sarge Gabode actually, but I say Gabode because I'm common and British. But now you might look at that and think, well, rubbish. What about the hippocampus? What about this part of the brain? What about that part of the brain? Okay. And I'm just going to impress at this point that it's probably better to understand this from a software, hardware point of view. Okay. The brain is a brain that does things based on the information that it receives. Okay. Now, there are some proponents of information theory that that feel that this is really important, the information theory side of things. And I do urge you to go and have a look at it because it's really interesting. But there are significant difficulties with trying to explain trauma from an information theory perspective. However, if you look at the simple actions that humans do from an empirical point of view, in the way that Aristotle did, we can start to see that actually a lot of this is about, or all of this is about understanding, but most of it we've not experienced, which I'm going to show you in a moment. Okay, so trauma is caused by, according to Gabode's model, an unresolved learning activity. That's the acceptance. That's the perception and integration into the new reality. that completes.
No, I'm sorry. Can I just interrupt you one tick? I'm actually in Australia and it's nearly 11 p.m. So I'm going to need to drop off at this point, and I'll just catch up on the recording.
Well, listen,
And,
I hope everything's well down there. Take care.
yeah, thank you. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Okay. So I want to explain that in terms of, I've just got to, this screen thing's getting on my nerves. I'm sorry. Let me get that. Right, there we are. Okay, so this is what Aristotle said about potential. And I think you might find this interesting as coaches too. Aristotle said, or wrote, that there were different things with regard to potential and achieving things and change. Okay, so you can't achieve change without a potential to change, and he called that dynamis. And we go through, regardless of whatever it is, we go from potential to actuality, right, through a becoming process. Okay, so if we looked at that in terms of a promotion at work, okay, so if I had the potential to be, promoted at work, I would go through a process which is called becoming to actualize that promotion at work. Yeah. Okay. Anybody not with me with that? All right.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So this is an interesting word, dynamis, and this is the word that it's a Greek word. I don't understand Greek. This is about as far as I go. But there are two types of dynamis that Aristotle described. One was potential, that something may happen. So if, in fact, I'll let the definition there sink in. The other one is propensity, and that's an innate and natural tendency to do something. All right. For example, a human may swim. So a human has the potential to swim if they can swim, if they've learned to swim, and if they've got some water to swim in. Okay. But for a fish, swimming is an innate and natural tendency. It lives in water and it swims like we walk. So we could say that walking is a propensity of ours, whereas it's not even a potential for a fish, is it? Okay, so there are two sort of slightly different types of potential or drives. One's just passive. It might happen if we do something about it. Okay, the other one is it will happen. Okay. And for a potential to exist, you've got to have the ability and the capability together. So the fish has the ability to swim, but without water, there is no capability for it to swim. Does that make sense? Okay. Now there is a point to this. I'm leading somewhere, so bear with if you're wondering about what's talking about fishes for. Okay. So let's look at growth and what Aristotle said about growth. Now the English language is really lovely for us because this is a great example of the same word meaning three different things. Okay. So if we had a potential for growth in whatever domain it is, it could be I want to become a better guitar player, or I want to learn to swim. That is growth. They're all different examples of growth. All right. So we can say that the potential is for growth, and the becoming process, the kinesis, the actual change between potential and actual, is also growth. We could say we're growing. That's fine. It's the same thing. But growth is the potential, growth is the becoming, and the actual endpoint for this is also growth. Or we could say, I have grown. Yeah? Okay. Now then, let's look at learning and understanding in terms of our activity cycles. Okay, so the potential for us to understand something is there. That's understanding. The potential is understanding. Okay, this process, understanding, is the becoming. So we learn to understand. We are understanding more and more and more until you get to a point of understanding. Okay. Now, luckily, that's a great one, because the intricacies of the English language are there. It's perfect for us. So let's have a look at that, or this, okay, in terms of understanding what happens when we experience something bad. Okay, so this is what I mean by people naturally recovering once they understand what's happened and what it means for them. Okay, so we've got the potential of understanding. We have the subjective amount of time whereby which we are understanding what has happened. Okay, and eventually we reach a point of understanding what happened and what it means for us. Okay, so our intention to understand here has been fulfilled through understanding, and we understand. Okay, all right. Now that's a good way, a philosophical way of expressing the process of recovery following something that's awful. Okay, but Sigmund Freud, who the famous psychoanalyst, he got a lot wrong. He did get a lot wrong, but he did get this right. He got this right. He identified a process called repression, and Gabodi also identified it. And the best way of putting it is that sometimes we have a conflict. No, not sometimes. We have a choice. When something bad happens, we either confront it head on and deal with it, or we avert our attention away from it and don't. Okay, so there's a choice there between choosing to understand and not choosing to understand. In a split second, poof, it's either gone. But repression is a process by which the outcome is to avert our attention from what is actually happening. And if it's painful enough, in whatever way, shape or form for the individual, okay, the split second go-to aversion of attention just disappears. So it's a bit like the brain, or the mind, sorry, wiping it out. And because it's wiped it out, you never knew it was there in the first place. So you can't actually be aware of the fact that your attention averted because you didn't experience it, because the mind just got rid of it so quickly, you never even knew it was there. Okay, and that's the intention to understand something. So this is what happens. So once repression's taken place, the learning cycle, the activity in which we're trying to understand what happened, is repressed and falls into unawareness. I'm reluctant to say subconscious, because it's not provable where it actually lives or doesn't live. It's just not there in terms of our awareness. Okay, but all the time we're going through our life following the incident, we still haven't fully understood it. So therefore, the potential to understand it hasn't been completed. And so the cycle is continual and goes on and on and on and on and on. So this is what we call a traumatic reaction. Okay, it's the inability to complete the learning cycle because of you don't know it's there. Okay, and if we look at that from our Aristotelian point of view with potential, we've got the potential to understand what happened, haven't we? Okay, and we are trying to understand it. So understanding, the becoming or kinesis, is still taking place, but the actuality of understanding is not fulfilled. And while ever the actuality of not understanding is unfulfilled, then understanding, that process of trying to understand, will continue. It will just continue until a point where we find an understanding that means something for us, that changes our meaning, and we can thereby move on. Okay, now I'm just going to go back to this dynamis concept. Okay, so for potential to exist, there must first exist ability and capability. Remember that, the fish that can swim or the human that may swim. Okay, so in this case, the human has the ability to understand, but without the data that it needs, it cannot understand. So the capability isn't there. So therefore, the potential to understand will never be fulfilled without the data that they need in order to fully understand it and have a full sense of that experience. Because without that data, that whole experience cannot be fully experienced or wholly experienced. A bit like having a jigsaw with a piece missing. Okay? And there we are, just to highlight that again. You know, without that data, without the data that we need to fully understand the experience, then we can't be said to have experienced the experience, because the experience of understanding is still ongoing.
So are you saying, Sean, that's why a lot of our coachee clients are stuck, because they have the capability to understand, say, go back to the repression, that they're repressed or traumatized from something in their childhood. So they understand it, but they don't have all the data because maybe their parents are dead, or there's no siblings to talk to. There is nobody else to sort of collaborate the experience.
I think there's a difference. A really good question, Dawn. Thanks. I think there's a difference in that, in this respect, with trauma. If we just put trauma to one side for a moment and think about a coachee that's stuck, okay? Now, the question for me would be, I'm just going to flip back a few slides actually, just right. Has the coach, if the coachee can't move forward, have they got the ability to move forward firstly? Okay, and if they've got the ability, have they got the capability? So for example, if the coachee wished to become a concert pianist, okay, but had got 3 fingers missing, we could argue that perhaps their ability might be limited, but they still may have an ability, okay? We could say if the coachee had got no fingers whatsoever, then their chances of being, they just don't have the ability to become a concert pianist. There's a difference there. Now, if I got fingers and I got the ability to move my fingers and play the piano, I still haven't got the capability because I've not yet learned to play the piano. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a backward rework or a reworked definition in some respects, although it is 2,000 years old. So I suppose it's an original definition between ability and capability. So if you've got a client that's stuck on something, is it because have they got the ability and capability in order to fulfill that potential? And if they can't fulfill the potential, then it's certainly worth looking at the capabilities and the abilities. Now that ability could be something cognitive. It could be, you know, a whole realm of different things. But if it's not innate within them, then it's something that they have to learn in order to achieve something. Does that make sense to you, Dawn? Have I answered that sufficiently?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. It's a good question. I think certainly with regard to some coachees, if they've experienced trauma, and let's face it, most of us have. Say, for example, you could be, I don't know, perhaps a relationship. I want to experience more fulfilling relationships. But the same guy has had, you know, an awful experience with a lady from New Zealand, for example, then if that experience has not fallen into the past, then they're going to be fearful of what the future holds. So it may be that they're stuck due to a fear created by a previous trauma, rather than it being directly it's because of this trauma. So, you know, when we talk about limiting beliefs, I think maybe this could form or could fall under that definition. A limiting belief is often actually a limiting fear. And if there's a limiting fear, where does that fear come from? Of course, it's all subjective and down to the client themselves, I suppose. But there we go. So just moving on a little bit then. So occasionally we'll be stimulated by something in our environment that reminds us of the unfulfilled learning activity. And that's what we call a flashback. And it's the flashback that gives us the opportunity to observe what's actually going on. It's the only clue you'll get to it, really, apart from, you know, as an outside objective observer. You know, why, for example, why does the client suddenly get irritated if you challenge something that they hold to be a cardinal point? Have you ever had a reaction with a client, for example, where you've just thought that was really, really over the top and really out of sync, and it surprises you? That is essentially a reactivation. Okay, and they're the things that can give us a slight little clue that there's something going off on a deeper level, which maybe, you know, is up to them if they want to address it or not, you know. But the feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, anger, frustration, upsets, the butterflies in the tummy, you know, they're all reminders of the actual incident, because the person is still in the understanding phase. So they're still in that becoming phase, the kinesis, okay, which means they haven't yet fully understood it, okay, and what it means for them, of course. Now, I just want to highlight this. I've put something in here just briefly. I'm not going to be too long with this, about the way that we work with people on a one-to-one basis and in group work, because I think it may have relevance for, because I know, I expect that some of you will be doing group coaching as well as individual one-to-one. So the system that we use is, there are 5 levels, but I'm just going to touch on 3 of them very briefly. Because it's got to do with learning and how we learn things and how we can help people as coaches. So the crisis continuum, that's the first sort of basic foundation skill that we workshop that we teach people, and the skills that we use is about helping people on a one-to-one basis. And you'll notice there that at the bottom, the thing that's important is this: it's the Socratic and didactic. Now, I don't know if you've heard of this before. You may have heard of the Socratic learning process, but didactic is a word that you don't tend to come up against very much. And there's a difference here. So Socratic learning is person-centered. That's what we all do as coaches. You know, we provide an opportunity for coachees to experience a Socratic learning process, because you ask the questions and you don't give them the answers. That's coaching. You ask the questions that will unlock them. You ask the questions that will enable them to think about their growth in a more structured format. That's Socratic learning. Now, didactic learning, okay, and this is Socratic is obviously from Socrates, and the didactic learning was identified by Aristotle, and that's a passive type of learning where somebody teaches you something. And it's the difference between consultancy and coaching. It's the difference between mentoring and coaching, more importantly, because a mentee experiences didactic learning most of the time. So the mentor gives the mentee the information by which they need to learn something, okay? And Socratic learning is learning from within, okay? And we use a mixture of both when we help people with trauma. And again, even from one-to-one stuff, we then touch on, we will then, if there's a need to escalate, we can do group interventions, which we call decompressions, which are, they're not very, it's not a very rigid structure, but it's designed to work with a group of people who have had the roughly the same experience of an incident and others. But again, just to highlight, there's a didactic and there's a Socratic learning process taking place again. And when we get into the more serious or more severe incidents, we're again relying on on didactic and Socratic learning. And I think the point with this that I need to just make with regard to coaching, because there are, I mean, the name's in the name, the meaning is in the name, International Authority for Professional Coaching and Mentoring. There are two different modalities which are quite separate in many respects. And excuse me, the learning process for both is very, very different, Socratic and didactic. But with trauma, we always seem to find that a mixture of the didactic and the Socratic is really important. So we encourage a Socratic learning process by asking questions. I'm going to show you in a moment. In fact, actually, it might be the next slide. No, I'll come to it in a minute. We ask questions designed to elicit a Socratic learning process within the different individuals within the room, okay? But we also provide information by virtue of, giving them the latest updates with regard to the nature of the incident, how many casualties there are, the potential outcomes for some of those casualties, the potential causality for the incident that they experienced, etc., and so on and so forth. So what we're trying to do is we're helping them to create their own vision or reality of what happened, but we're also giving them data by which they can help form that new reality, that understanding for them, okay? And that's because of this. And again, it's Aristotle again. And Aristotle identified something that we can place a value in information in terms of data, or as Aristotle put it, beliefs. It's the same thing. But it's got to be reputable, So you're not going to listen to, for example, you take your car to the mechanics and you say, look, I've never taken one of these apart before in my life, never seen one, but I'm sure it's your carburettor. You're going to go, well, actually, I don't think you know what you're talking about. So then you're not going to let them near your new Jag, are you? Okay. But if, for example, you take your car to the mechanics and he says, I'm actually a Jaguar expert. I used to work on the lines. And I've got a fairly good idea of how this engine works, and I think it might be that. Do you want me to have a look at it? You're more likely to say, yes, I am. Yes, please crack on. So we have a value in reputable beliefs, and most of that is in peer support. So the police officer who's got the reputable belief with the police officer, etc., because you have that mutual understanding, and the coach and the client. If you've already got that working relationship, if your coaching relationship is good, then it will benefit the client in terms of this endoxa thing. I'm going to run over a few minutes, Dawn, I'm afraid. So going back to capabilities and abilities, if you don't have the data, you don't have the capability to understand. So if we provide data, or we facilitate a process that provides data, then we're increasing the chance of that capability becoming a reality so that they can understand it. So we provide the data, it allows them to understand, basically. Okay. So again, just the little reference there with mentees. Does a mentee have a capability when they're new to an organisation and they don't understand what the systems or processes are? Their capabilities are very, very limited. That's why we put red diamonds on probationary firefighters' helmets, because we know that their capabilities are limited. okay? But the mentor provides the information that they need in order for their capability to expand, okay? And this is just to highlight this, it'll only be a few minutes because I know we're getting close to time, but this is how we set up a crisis briefing. So we'll have like facilitators, usually 3 or 4, but we always keep one at the door for a wicket keeper in case we get a runner. And that's somebody who gets so distressed, we have to safeguard them outside, okay? But what we do, it's a dead simple process. The lead facilitator will ask questions of the attendees, all of which will have attended the incident or been present or affected by it in some shape or form. Okay, and the other facilitators are watching the other guys in the room. So the attention of the lead is on this person, but the attention of this facilitator is on these 3. So this guy is watching for reactions here, while this guy is looking to that person, and this one will be looking across here. So we're observing everybody in the room, looking for behavioural indicators. Okay, and we ask them different questions, and we take them through a process which orientates them in terms of where were you at the time of the incident, etc. And then the next question is about impressions. What was your first thought when this happened? How did you react when this happened? Okay, and each question is asked of each individual as we go around the room. And of course, all the answers that are coming out are being listened to by the other people in the room. Okay. And then we ask a question about expectancy. And this is just an example. And I use this because it was something that we learned from the Borough Market attack, and it was a wonderful thing. That somebody became really distressed about a particular aspect of that incident because they were on the ground trying to resuscitate a person who'd been stabbed and was bleeding profusely. The police officer, all she had was an asp. Okay, so she's pumping up and down as best she can on the casualty. She's got her asp ready, and a terrorist is running towards her with the knives. I don't know if you can remember the attack. And she thought in a split second, I'm dead. And she thought she was going to die. And then suddenly, the terrorist's gone, nowhere to be seen, and am I still alive? She actually thought that she'd been killed because she'd had this dissociative moment, okay? And what happened was, in that debriefing, 2 of the other police officers in the room said, oh no, they were on the opposite side of the road to this officer. Said, oh no, he went down Middle Walk. And Middle Walk is it's like a little part of Borough Market. And so what had happened was the terrorist was running towards the officer. She just dissociated. And the next thing, the terrorist's not there. I'm still alive. Am I still alive? What happened? How did that happen? And couldn't understand it. Just could not understand how she'd survived what she thought was certain death. And when the other officers that were on the other side of the road told her that they'd seen the terrorist in question dodge down this little Middle Walk alleyway thing, suddenly, the clouds part. And now I understand what happened. And it went from being something that was painful to something that was like, whew. I've got it. I understand it. And that was I think about a week and a half after the attack. So there is a value in providing data through that NDOXA thing. And why, if you're group coaching, you can also have a positive effect. You need training to do that, but I'm just trying to illustrate the potential for positive outcomes in that regard. Okay. So we're nearly there, and thanks for your attention so far, because I know it's not the best thing, is it, sometimes webinars. But so psychosocial support resources. This is you, yeah. Where are you? There you are. Caring practitioners and professionals, but also you'll also be friends. You'll also be family with people and peers and colleagues. You won't be animals. That's a different matter. But using your person-centered coaching skills, just being attentively present is really, really, really important. And you can do that. Animals is a different matter, because animals, we're not quite worked that out yet. We're just introducing a peer support dog. up here in Nottinghamshire, and his name's Reggie. It's dead cute and it's brilliant. It has this wonderful effect on people, but we've not quite worked out the science behind it. So we're going to be observing Reggie for a while. But don't underestimate the power that you can have to support somebody just by being present. Okay, so just to highlight again, learning through coaching is Socratic, it's active. The coachee is taking the active part. Consultation is didactic, and it means that they've got to accept your data. Now, as a coach, you can provide data, about expectant symptoms. This may happen. You might not eat well for a week or two. You might experience, unpleasant dreams, etc. So you can provide expectancy information that will help them through a crisis experience. Okay. So coaching is, and I truly believe it, that coaching is, if it's done properly and in a person-centered point of view, it's psychosocial support in its truest sense. That's the most important thing. And I want to leave you with this. Aristotle said that one should have surveyed all the difficulties beforehand, because people who inquire without first stating the difficulties are like those who do not know where they have to go. Okay. Now, as coaches, you do that. You help people do that because you help them to observe with their own senses what's happening. And it's only when they get to a point of, when they reach that insight, it enables them to get past something, get past a stuck moment, get past a blockage. You're doing that. Already you're doing that. You're getting them to observe them and state the appearances of what the problem is. And it's only then that they can then address the trauma, that they can begin to understand it. And you do that already. Okay. So that's me, I think. That's me. And I hope that you've gained something from today. My email's there if you want to jot that down, if you've not got it. And I'm quite happy to answer any questions via email. If indeed you have any, or if there's anything that you think you might want to discuss with me, that's absolutely fine. Okay.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
A few minutes for questions. So anybody who doesn't want to send an email and has got a burning question right now, you can unmute yourself and ask Sean while we have his undivided attention.
Hi, Sean. You obviously know my background as an almost 30-year cop. The bit about dissociation, you were talking about the concentration span. I noticed, and it's a well-known phenomenon, that when you're taking statements from people who've been at the same incident, that they can often have a totally different perspective. And I'm guessing the dissociation is something along those lines. Is that right?
I think that's a great question, Ginny. It's a bit like who sees the gorilla and who doesn't. I suppose that, the first thing with learning, because that is what you're doing. You're learning. When you're observing something take place in front of you, you're learning about what's happening. So you're receiving, aren't you? Mm-hmm. And of course, you can be in a geographically different place to another person, which changes, it changes let me get that right, changes the circle to the oblong. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that analogy, the photos? Yeah. So perspective is different. It can be different from a geographical point of view, but it can also be different from a psychological point of view. And so we can often, I think, pick things out that are of more importance to us and forget other stuff, whereas another person may remember, oh yeah, I remember it got a red top on. But another witness may think, may have only focused on the shoes and have no idea what was up here. I don't know. But I think it's really interesting with regard to whether or not it's best to question a witness in the immediate aftermath or best to question them later, because I'm pretty sure that there's a Socratic learning process that, the understanding part is still ongoing for a lot of people in the days and weeks after experiencing something. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is a reason why sometimes a witness may change a statement or whatever, because they feel that actually, no, this is what happened because I thought about it and whatever. Might not be that they're making it up. It's just that they've gone through that process of learning. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I've been in a situation where we've been expected to take an immediate statement, and usually there's not an awful lot of value in that because it's all very chaotic. Because again, as you're saying, they haven't gone through that assimilation process and understanding what's going on. And then I've taken a statement from them later, and it's a totally different thing. It's much calmer. They can relate information. Maybe the description is probably, you know, if you're looking, I know it's going back to my previous career, but if you're looking for the perpetrator of a crime, you try and get that description quickly. But then the actual, if you like, the bones of the situation is probably better described later, because it gives them time to sit and work through the whole process of what they've witnessed, and then they can start to remember things.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Sean.
Anybody else? Just to clarify, Sean, if I understand this correctly, a definition of trauma is the unresolved learning activity, which means that actually during a period of COVID, for instance, many of our clients are traumatized because one of your earlier slides says it doesn't have to be.
I don't think that will be applicable because the difference is this, and it's a really great question, Don. I'm glad you brought it up. The difference is this: is that COVID is ongoing in the physical, you know, aspect of it in our world. COVID is still happening, okay, and therefore it's not over. So there's a difference with that. So what we're talking about with trauma is something that's objectively over. So for example, if we compare COVID to the Spanish flu of the 1920s, okay. Unfortunately, I don't think there'll be many people that will still be alive that can remember that. But in a chronological sense, the Spanish flu is over. Whereas, so you could potentially, if it's objectively over, somebody who experienced that may experience trauma as a result of that. But it's objectively over. Now, because COVID is ongoing and is not objectively over and is not a thing of the past, it's still very much live. I think it's impossible for us to say, because only when it's objectively over will the residual indicators become apparent. And I think there'll be, you know, I'm not a scaremonger with this, because I think there's been a lot of scaremongering in the media with regard to, it's going to be a mental health nightmare, whatever. You know, it's not the same for everybody. But I do think we will see, I would imagine, a significant residual impact in terms of mental health.
Especially amongst the youngsters.
I'm sorry, Dawn?
Especially amongst the youngsters, the teens.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you know, going back to the pro-traumatic indicators thing with Oza et al. If social support is valuable and there's plenty of it, that's great. I can imagine that there are plenty of children in the UK right now, probably across the world, whose level of social support in terms of family and the home life isn't great, and there's not a lot of it. And I think that's one of the main, you know, it ought to be one of the main drivers for getting children back into school, in order to provide that social resource that they may not have at home. But then, of course, you're dealing with adverse childhood experiences on top of adverse childhood experience on top of adverse childhood experience, and so on and so forth. So there may be a greater potential by virtue of previous trauma, you know.
I'll just share this with you. It's a kind of funny thing, just very briefly. Over the weekend, because I live in farmland, I had the opportunity to save a calf, probably a couple of days old, maybe a week. It was a very hot day and dehydrated, and you know, it would have died if I hadn't found it. And I actually thought, oh, this was a real privilege. This calf was beautiful. Its head was in my lap, and I was pouring water in from a watering can because it couldn't suck and eat. And, you know, got help and got it reunited with its mother because it had just escaped or been abandoned. When I told my friend, they said, God, that sounds really traumatic. You must be really traumatized. And I thought, that never entered my head. It was a beautiful experience. I felt so privileged. I just thought then that's really interesting. The two different perceptions that this was a traumatic event for me, and I wasn't traumatized at all.
Yeah. Did you do a good job?
Did who do a good job?
You.
Yeah. And now I said I'm not traumatized because it was a happy ending. Maybe I'd been traumatized if I'd found it dead or it died in my lap. That would have been different, but no. And they heard the whole story and they just said, oh God, that must have been so traumatic. And it just struck me that how could they have viewed that as traumatic?
Yeah.
It shows how different we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And different perspectives and so on and so forth, and our own subjective experience.
Yeah.
That, you know, I mean, we're all different, you know.
Okay, well, on that note, our 90 minutes with you, Sean, are up. So once again, thank you for your generosity of spirit and sharing your time and insight. Very, very valuable. And you've mentioned safeguarding quite a few times. So what I will do when I put the recording up is I will link it to the webinar that Nikki and David in the IAPC&M did on safeguarding, particularly at this current time. Where we're dealing with increasingly complex and sophisticated client needs around COVID. So loss of a loved one, loss of income, loss of status, freedom, and so on. So any other questions, please do email Sean directly. And yeah, thank you very much for all your interest and participation, everybody. Thank you very much, Sean, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.